Welcome to another edition of the Litigation Psychology Podcast brought to you by Courtroom Sciences. I am your host and fearless leader, Dr. Bill Kanasky. With me today, Bryan Falchuk. Bryan is the president and CEO of an industry trade organization in the insurance industry called PLRB. He is a thought leader in the industry, and he is the author of the Future of Insurance book series, which something that we all may want to dive into. 25 years in the insurance industry. Bryan, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Bill.
Bryan, this is cool because, again, we've had a couple of people from the actual insurance industry on in the last 5 years, but it's been few and far between for various reasons. And you see so much about the insurance industry on news, on social media, on LinkedIn. And I think it's great to get somebody from this side of the equation. I think it's great. So thanks so much for being here. Now, before we get started with some questions, tell me about how did you get into this industry? Because something tells me you weren't at career day in high school at 15 years old saying, hey, I'm going to be a big player in the insurance industry, right? I didn't think that. It's probably not the way it happened, right?
No. I think the joke that everyone says is they got into insurance by accident.
Yeah.
And I always had unless your parents were agents, that seems to be the only way that you get the generational insurance. So for me, it was the same, although my dad and I are both car guys. And when I was a little kid, a Ferrari went by. I think I was 7 or 8. And as you should do as a little kid, when that thing happens, I was, wow, that's incredible. And he just looked at me and he's like, do you know how much it costs to insure a car like that? I don't know why he said that. He's not in insurance. And you can still appreciate the car, even if I'm not buying it. I don't care how much it costs to insure. But I do think maybe the seed was planted in that moment and I just didn't realize it yet. But yeah, I got into it by accident, great job opportunity to do management consulting, and it happened to be at an insurance company, and I've never looked back.
Yeah, my first exposure to insurance was when I turned 16 years old and was put on my parents' insurance. And the looks on their faces when they got the first bill was quite shocking. And guess what? Now I have a 16-year-old, and my insurance quickly doubled.
Yeah.
And so now I've suffered this nightmare twice. But funny enough, and this is what we see with our jury research, insurance tends to have a very negative connotation, whether it's health insurance, right? The cost of that. We see all kinds of things negative. There's never really a positive type of story going on about insurance. Yeah. And then again, we hear mock jurors and things like that. How do you work in an industry and kind of keep it together, right? When so many people have a kind of a negative slant towards it, because it's not all negative, and we know that there's this positive side. I think the problem is I don't see society and the people, i.e. the jurors, the voters. They never see the positive side. Do you see that to be a challenge in your job?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's getting worse because of the sort of the tone and the vitriol that we have in this country. I mean, a lot of countries, the US is particularly nasty. The thing that I think a lot of people lose sight of is, are there bad claim situations? Are there insurers who are doing the wrong thing at times? Absolutely. Is it intentional? That's a whole other question. People mess up. People make bad decisions. People have emotional reactions to things and dig in. We end up in bad places. That is not a new thing. What you never hear about is every day there are literally, I would imagine, over 1 million claims that are handled easily. I mean, I was a chief claims officer at a mid-size, small commercial focused carrier, and we did tens of thousands of claims a year, and we were, nothing from a scale of the major personal lines carriers. So I'm guessing millions of claims every day. You don't hear about the vast majority of them. I do think it's like any online survey or customer feedback. You only hear about the extremes. I think in the industry, we get a lot of the testimonials from people who, like this was amazing. I was just reading some actually about adjusters, the letters that they've gotten from people just, like gushing with thanks.
Yeah.
That's not news. No one wants to hear that.
Yeah.
But then you hear about the other extreme. But it's this damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of spot where either you're paying all this money and you never have a claim and you're bitter about that,
Yep.
understandably. You paid all this money for nothing and my rates keep going up, right?
Hmm.
Or you paid all this money, you have a claim, and even if it goes perfectly, you still had something terrible happen to you. Like if
Yeah.
anyone has suffered, been, sued, had a tree fall through their house, the loss of a loved one, major car accident.
Yeah.
I don't care how well it goes, you still suffered a trauma. So no matter what, a friend of mine who's a CIO was talking about his support desk, and he's like, everyone hates IT. He said it's really a goalkeeper job. He's like, what does that mean? It's the perfect way, I think, to describe insurance. You
Yeah.
only hear when the ball goes in the net, right? Do we talk about the saves? No.
That's really incredible because when I work with witnesses, and I can only use, well, I guess you can use it in Florida, but when I'm like, northern Midwest, right, and I'm in these hockey towns, I tell witnesses like that's the problem with deposition testimony. You know, they can fire 55 shots at the net, and
Yeah.
if two go in, you could lose,
Right.
right? It's like how you block shots, and as you know, the goalie isn't maybe the most attractive person on the ice,
They
and
have a mask. Right.
that big mask, and
Yeah.
and they can have a really really good game and
Yeah.
block 98% of the shots, and two slip by and you can lose, and that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the goalie's rarely the MVP.
Very very rarely.
It's yeah.
So tell us about PLRB.
Yes.
Who are you? What do you do? Let's educate the audience about that.
So the hardest part is getting the letters right. And when people
Yeah.
ask what does it stand for, I was like, don't worry about that. Let's just
Plurb,
focus on the letters.
plurb. I'm just gonna
But
start
yeah,
calling plurb.
don't call it plurb. That sounds terrible.
Okay.
So it stands for Property and Liability Resource Bureau. And the thing I always say is if you hear the word bureau, either you're in a lot of trouble or something very boring is about to happen. So call it PLRB and that's fine. And that's how most people would know us. So we are a nonprofit trade organization of the insurance industry. So carriers in the US are members. We've got about 70% of the core lines of business covered by our members, or written by our members, I should say. So, really good representation across the market. And we are focused really on helping support the delivery of coverage. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's primarily at the coalface at claims. So we're helping adjusters and claims professionals in the delivery of that promise. I say coverage more broadly because we have underwriters who turn to us. We have, wordings and product people, actuaries, et cetera, who come to us as well. So it's not just claims, but it's ultimately about that delivery of claims, which is coverage. We have legal support, so we have attorneys who will help you interpret what's going on with, the endorsement and the policy wording seem to be at odds. Here's a claim situation. I don't understand. What do we do? You can send that all to us. We've got a database of literally tens of thousands of pieces of legal analysis we've done. So you can search like who has dealt with matching in Illinois on,
Yeah.
siding on a house. Like, obviously, I'm not the first person to face that. Is there an answer on how I navigate this? So we've got a lot of legal resources. We have weather analytics and mapping. We've got building codes from around the country, and a really cool interactive database. We're only one of two places that you can turn to for that, other than like walking into a town hall,
Yeah.
which is not as convenient as just coming to our site.
Sure.
And then what a lot of people know us for is our education resources. So we run a number of in-person events, and we've got over 1,000 modules on our website, and we help adjusters get their license credits. So, we do a lot of CE credit granting. Big conferences, like over 100 classes. We've got about 3,500 people who come through, and they burn through a lot of CE requirements
Yeah.
like in a few short days. So it's great. And it's when I was looking at the job, the thing I kept hearing from people, I would ask like, what do you think of PLRB? Tell me as I'm considering going there. And I talked to a number of chief claims officers who were like, I wouldn't be where I am if not for PLRB helping me when I was new in the
Yeah.
role, or, as I was going along handling claims. And that's really beautiful kind of purpose. So that's at the heart of our mission is supporting those members to make sure that they can be, we say we're the insurance experts resource. We're not the experts, you are. We're
Yeah.
just here to help you in being that expert.
PLRB.org is the
.org. Yep.
website. Go there for more information. Can you give? I'd love your perspective on the state of the insurance industry today.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's plenty of headaches and worries and concerns. I want to hear about those.
Yeah.
At the same time, I want to hear about maybe innovation, new ideas. You have things like AI growing in all industries, and maybe some
Yeah.
exciting things as well that maybe our audience could be educated on and benefit from.
Yeah. It is a interesting, which is maybe a euphemism for tough time for the industry. I think we're sort of pictured as like money grubbing and we're making all this money and we're raising rates and people think that means that we're making a ton of money and actually it's kind of the opposite. So this is a really unique moment. We've always faced tough times. There's spikes in weather activity, there's spikes in
Sure.
inflation, social inflation, litigation. These things always happen, but they're all happening at once. And they have been happening at once for a few years now, and they're not stopping. So we would get these blips, rates go up, the holes of losses are filled, and we're profitable again, and the industry continues, and then there's another blip. This is the insurance cycle. Things are a bit different now. And I don't think that this is an aberration. I think this is a new, I hate the term new normal, but I think that's sort of what it
Yeah.
is much more frequent and severe activity, whether it's weather activity, whether it's lawsuit activity. I mean, this is not news that when there's a class action lawsuit and there's a settlement or a judgment, that becomes a new floor. We hear a number and wow, and that'll never happen again. No, no, no. That is now the minimum. And the
Yeah.
next case like it, which is already brewing because there was so much money in that first case, that is the starting point, not the finish. So we just ratchet up and that's not slowing down. If you look at the weather data and you look at the severity data, it used to be years between major events. It's months now.
Yeah.
I just had a resilience expert from Northeastern University who studies all this. They've looked at 100 years of data, 1920 to 2020, and it was years between major events, and now it's months. And so that doesn't give the industry the chance to recover, which means profitability is severely impacted, which means rates go up, which means people can't afford their coverage. Yet we also we can't afford to sell it even at that higher price.
Yeah.
And so my concern today is using the tools we've always had. The coverage we've been selling since literally the 1950s is when most lines of business were defined. And the like raise rates and pull out of tough areas, that kind of reaction and try to cut costs. Those tools don't work anymore. Like we have reached what I
Hmm.
think is the limit of their effectiveness. Short term, they're fine tourniquets, but you can't pull out of every geography and every line of business because none of them work. Like ultimately,
Yeah.
that doesn't,
Yeah.
it's not viable. So I think this is an interesting moment where you mentioned innovation. I think it's time where, um, sort of by necessity, we have to start doing things differently. And
Yeah.
I'm really tired of the fallback on efficiency. And like I'm an ex-management consultant. I love efficiency,
Yeah.
but it's not our expense ratio, it's the loss ratio. We have to start addressing the actual quality of the risks that we write, the coverage that we offer for them, and the intelligence we bring to the pricing and response to them. So I think it's a major turning point for the industry. I
Yeah.
hope.
How has specific to litigation? Tell us about your experience with
Yeah.
litigation, and then also, the plaintiff's bar has put a ton of time, a ton of energy, a ton of money into really attacking everything insurance. In fact, most of the whether it's a billboard or a commercial or a TikTok, one of the first things out of their mouths is, hey, the insurance company's out there to screw you,
Yeah.
and that's fueled a lot of litigation. What's been your experience with litigation, and what are the kind of the key issues now with
Yeah.
that?
So I mentioned I was a chief claims officer. So I spent 20 years on the carrier side, and my last role was running claims for a carrier. Because we were a specialist commercial lines carrier, we sold a lot of E&O, D&O, so professional liability, GL. Kind of everything we did was around a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So I was around litigation quite a bit. And, we had a fantastic panel of law firms that we got to work with, defense and coverage, and really relied on them. And my team was mostly made up of attorneys in-house. We've had, plenty of non-attorneys too, but the majority of folks did have their JD. So a lot of legal expertise in and outside of the team. Um, I learned a few things. Um, I think we were on the right side of the kind of values question of do you cover it, do you not cover it? I mean, there's a rhyming saying, if it's gray, we pay. I think it's overused. We genuinely lived that. And in specialty lines, a lot of things are gray. So our take going back to the company's founding and in the UK years ago was um, it's much less expensive to pay the right amount quickly than
Yeah.
it is to nickel and dime and to argue over things and try to cut corners. You're going to agitate someone, and especially in today's world, when you agitate someone, they become, a serious adversary that will push and like you said, they only need one or two things to win at the end of the day, and there's always something somewhere on either side. So it's not all that hard. So we recognize like, fairness really does matter in how you treat the other side, your own people, certainly your legal partners who are working hand in hand with you. And we did try to view them as partners. And that really, one of the things that came down to was on the price side. We were too small to get their attention on volume. I can't promise you what, a carrier 10 times our size is going to promise in volume, but I can pay you a reasonable and fair hourly rate and, and adjust bills fairly. And when you push back, take that pushback and really consider it. And I had lots of competitors who didn't work that way. And the firms we work with are like, listen, do we get more business from carrier X? Yeah, a little bit, but we can eat based on what you pay us.
Yeah.
And with them, we're in the hole. Or we have to farm it out to more junior folks, or, we can't take the time on it because we're already so underwater on it. And you can argue, like, are they lying? Is that a negotiation
Yeah.
tactic, whatever? I don't think telling me that we're paying them enough for them to have profit is a great negotiating
Yeah.
tactic. So I would tend to believe them. But I can tell you it mattered. When we sent them files, they responded. When we needed expertise and we needed to talk, they talked and they gave us their best. And we weren't getting nickeled and dimed on the bills either. It was a relationship and a partnership. And I think that if you recognize like trimming your LAE or your defense costs a little bit, that's great. You'll save a few cents.
Yeah.
If you bring $1 million settlement to $100,000 settlement, like I'll take that all day and pay 5 points more on the defense costs.
Yeah. Oh,
And that's how we viewed it.
yeah, 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 totally. So I mean, 23 years of doing jury consulting and civil litigation. I deal with insurance companies every week. They're many of our clients. We've seen a shift from I give speeches on this topic. You have the kind of like the traditional insurance defense model, which I call save money, save money, save money, save money, save money, save money. Oh shit, this case is not settling. Spend
Right.
money, spend money, spend money, spend money,
Yeah.
which can lead to a lot higher settlement
Yeah, it
value.
doesn't average out when it's exponential growth.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Then, nuclear verdicts, nuclear
Right.
settlements, right? And so then we've seen this shift with our clients, and these are the people we try to align with, the clients that say, you know what, we could be far more proactive earlier in the case.
Yeah.
We can do things like jury research early. And yeah, we may spend more money early, but our savings on the back end is substantial because we're not painting ourselves into a corner to which we're
Yeah.
going to have to write a big check to get out of that. Can you talk to a little bit about how early intervention
Yeah.
on many of these cases in litigation can ultimately pay off both strategic and economically
Yeah.
for everybody?
Well, I mean, I think if you go back to when you brought up the plaintiff's bar and
Yeah.
how it's spending money to paint a picture, and they are, I mean, the advertising dollars and the
Oh,
unified message is massive. The largest firm spends more than most P&C carriers do, which I love pointing that out to people as much as I can because it's not the message they go around telling you at all. And one of the founding partners did a tour of their home for local media, and there's over 100 rooms in that house. Like it's just him and his wife.
yeah.
They're not housing,
Yeah.
a population in there. So, you look at that and you can focus on that piece of it. And I think a lot of people do, just like they want people focusing on aspects of us. We focus on that and we get angry and
Yeah.
reactive, which I think they want. Instead, what I would rather people focus on is how strategic and professional their business acumen is. From the fraudsters to the legitimate, like it
Yeah.
is really smart business and it burns me. It's so coordinated across quote unquote competing firms, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's coordinated, it's really strategic, it's well thought out, it's a very well oiled machine. And I actually see this in cyber criminals as well. The moment you're on to the game, they've already moved on.
They've already
Actually,
moved
not
on.
the moment, long since.
Yeah.
I remember one of the things people were doing with cyber attacks was, you do your nightly backups. And so when they infiltrate and they send you the ransom note, we're just
Yeah.
going to back up from yesterday or 2 days ago, and you're gone. No, they've been actually sitting in your system for years. We
Yeah.
found like 2, 3 years. And so whatever backup you want to use, that back door is there. They're already there and they've got you. That was a brilliant move on the part of cyber folks, cyber, perpetrators. Um, the plaintiff's bar is just as brilliant with a lot of these moves. And so we're playing this game of like, nope, we're in 140 an hour. Well, our going rate is 3. No, we agree 140, and I want paralegals doing this, and like it's fine. It should all be rational and fair.
Yeah.
But are you squeezing in the right place? Are you really sitting down? Are you partnering? Is the person who's managing that claim with defense counsel actually putting their brain into it?
Hmm.
Or they say, well, a defense counsel said X. Maybe. What if you brought your knowledge and understanding to that conversation and engaged with defense counsel? Could they come to a better understanding of the risks? You're leaving them to their devices with, half the picture, the legal picture, but half the
Yeah.
picture. You need to bring the carrier side of it. You need to participate in that too. We need to get more strategic. We need more data and more analytics guiding some of these decisions. And we need to be more engaged and stop worrying about, well, but that takes 13 more minutes. So,
Yeah.
it's the wrong, the LAE is the loss adjusting expense is the wrong place for us to focus our efforts. We used to look at a ratio of that
Yeah.
LAE to indemnity, and we also did it with defense spend. Not to say there's a right or wrong ratio, and it's going to depend on a number of different factors, market, the lines, et cetera. But at least to say like this claim's way out of whack from what we'd normally see. Is that intentional, or are
Hmm.
we doing something wrong? It wasn't to flip things around. It was just to help bring attention. Like, are we missing something here? There might be an issue we need to hone in on. And I think that awareness and taking a more business acumen, strategic mindset approach pays off.
Yeah. Yeah. So many of defense counsel listen to this podcast. I speak all over the country and I talk to them, and many of them come on the podcast. Yeah. And many have, in all honesty, many of them had said that, some insurance companies pay terrible rates,
Yeah.
but they promise volume, right?
Yeah.
And then other insurance companies, you know, the defense attorney sends in their bill and they're chopping their bill.
Yeah.
And then defense attorney says, hey, I got this bad witness. I want to hire Kanasky. And they're like, no, prep them yourself. Okay, fine. Well, I need 2 days to prep them. No, I'll pay for a half a day of prep. And so a lot of defense attorneys, I think, feel handcuffed by some insurance companies
Yeah.
on that kind of, protecting, cost and expenditure up front. And then when they're asking for weaponry, going up against, one of
Yeah.
these, particularly a prominent plaintiffs, you could see how they get a little bent out of shape, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that you've come across, and have you seen changes in the industry maybe addressing that issue? Because another final kind of complaint,
Yeah.
which this is a big one. This came up on a podcast recently with Tad Eckenrode, who had brought up, him going to clients saying, listen, like, I need to get this associate grown, right? They need experience. I need to work them into these cases. And then you have some insurance companies like, no, we only want senior people working on this. He's like, well,
Yeah.
how do you expect our attorneys to grow and become better and professionally develop? And so there seems to be this kind of butting of heads with the two philosophies. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah. I mean, so have I seen it? Yes. Have I been a part of it? Less so. I'm sure there are claims that happen in
Yeah.
my org that, someone listening, like, dude, I worked one of those claims and your person was doing all these bad things.
Yeah.
Um, I wasn't aware of it if it was that, and that wasn't our approach. But I think, unfortunately, I think these are deep-seated kind of cultural, regular practice, like SOP, standard
Hmm.
operating protocol kind of things. And I think the problem with that is the carriers who do it will always do it. And unfortunately, hubris gets in the way of them changing. So, am I seeing a change? No. I'm seeing the
Yeah.
ones who do it right continue to do it right.
Yeah.
You know, unless their chief claims officer leaves and a new person comes in who came from one of the others and is
Yeah.
like, this is terrible. We're going to fix everything.
Hmm.
One piece of advice that has struck me lately is, we're talking about the carriers getting better data and understanding the outcomes.
Yeah.
Why can't the attorneys do that too? So if you're a defense counsel and you're working for carriers who are, restrictive and guiding you think in the wrong direction to the wrong result, that carrier only knows its own business. So it might think that $1 million judgment or settlement was a good outcome, where that could have been a much more appropriate number.
Hmm.
But they don't know that because all they see is all their stuff that they're nickel and diming and sort of managing to a worse outcome. So they think that was better. It's I don't know if I've ever told you this before. It's like a bank robbery analogy. I say it's like, well, if you robbed 10 banks last year and six this year, you're better for sure. You're not supposed to rob banks,
Yeah.
right? So like the answer isn't 40% fewer banks got robbed, it's none.
Yeah.
So if you also work with carriers where it's a partnership and there's a recognition that, look, we're going to need to put in more here,
Hmm.
but here's the upside to it. And you have the evidence from the cases you've worked that there's an upside. Why aren't you compiling that data and try to make that case? And lastly, maybe you don't need to work with those carriers. So if you do
Yeah.
more work at a money losing rate, you lose more money,
Yeah.
right? This isn't the dot-com model of the 90s. Like selling more at a loss does not suddenly make you profitable. And your work it's human intelligence and hours based. So there's no economies of scale. I mean, a little bit, but not really. You're not facing economies of scale where you can now put out 15 widgets for the same hour. It doesn't work that way. So, your hour is your hour. You can only put that towards one thing. So if it's not a money winning, if it's not a viable business proposition to keep working that way, then maybe that needs to be your answer.
Yeah. I was talking to a defense attorney who shall go unnamed.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of very private discussions with people because they like to come to me to vent for whatever reason. And he said, listen, he goes, when I'm working on a file and the billable rate on that file is capped at 150 or whatever
Yeah.
it is, right? And then I have a different file for a different carrier and they're paying me 225. He goes, I gotta be honest, Bill, I'm working harder on the 225 file than
Yeah.
I am the 150
Whether
file.
you intend to or
What do
not.
they expect me to do?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of
Because I'll
tricky.
give you another 150 an hour file later. Like,
Yeah,
oh, well, thank you.
yeah, it's a tricky, how the math works, but just how the human psychology
Yeah.
is of it, right? And so,
Yeah, and I think I don't think anyone's, or maybe some people, but the majority of people are not making that judgment maliciously or
yeah,
intentionally. I mean, we do that with our own people, with everyone. That's human nature,
sure.
subconsciously at least. You're going to tend towards a thing that's better for you. And then we wonder why we get the outcomes that we do. So, yeah, I mean, the
The whole
problems
get
are
what you
baked
pay,
into the
you get
system.
what you pay for type of,
Yeah, 100%. I do want to talk just briefly on your
yeah,
point about the junior person.
yeah,
I've seen firsthand where, um, first of all, seniority and tenure are not skills. They
yeah,
may they
yeah,
may align, but not necessarily. So,
yeah.
in the midst of a cyber claim, a law firm that we had worked with representing us on claims, they got hacked, and my boss, the group head of claims, insisted that we had cyber insurance, and they appointed counsel, insisted that the partner handle everything because there was an associate originally, and my boss was very upset about that. The partner was terrible, was he was the face of the firm, but he really did not know the intricacies of modern cyber claims. The associate we were working with was outstanding, just absolutely outstanding. Luckily, I had my own cyber team, and so I asked, like, can we coordinate this on behalf of the group? Because the U.S. team was sort of the cyber experts, and he allowed that because he had respect for us. And so we just worked around the partner. But we needed to have the partner's name on things for my boss to be
Sure.
satisfied. But we knew better. I mean, you could see instantly is like, this guy doesn't know what he's saying. But for my boss, it was like, I want the gravitas of the partner.
Yeah.
It's the wrong thing. And it's, I mean, you wouldn't feel any different in surgery if you're having, LASIK or I had back surgery, a very minor back surgery, microdiscectomy. The last thing I needed was to have my whole back opened up because then I'd have scar tissue and all kinds of other stuff. If I went to the absolute best neurosurgeon in the world, they're going to open me up because that's what they do. If I go to the guy who just does this one little thing and does it perfectly, that's great. It may not be as impressive to you that I didn't go to the dean of, whatever, like Harvard neurosurgery or whatever, but that's not the right answer for that case. So yes, it doesn't help with the learning and the growth, but even if you don't care about that, shouldn't you care about the quality and the skill set and the acumen, which isn't necessarily aligned to the person who's been there the longest?
Yeah, no, that's
It might
totally
be,
true.
but it might not be.
Yeah. Well, I got a couple more questions for you. Then
Yeah.
I know you're running out of town, and that's good for you. Here's a little bit of a curveball for you.
Okay.
This I've heard this idea being kicked around for well over a decade, and it's been popping up on LinkedIn recently. And I've seen a few advertisements for kind of CLEs or CEs on this topic, and it never seems to get wheels for whatever reason. Is the whole flat fee billing concept for litigation, and essentially having, would it be beneficial to everybody? In other words, many of people have said on both sides of this equation, from carriers and from defense counsel, it's this hourly billing model is kind of the fundamental part of the problem, right? And if law firms approach carriers with more of a flat fee model, I know some have tried this and some have done it. It's just not really very popular.
Yeah.
Does that help the insurance industry? Does it hurt? Where have you ever tried that or been associated with that?
I mean, not on the litigation side or the defense side. I've seen it in other places and in other spaces too, outside of insurance. I think there's situations where it would work out really well, and I think there's somewhere where it would work out really poorly. I think the problem is on the extremes, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You need some like severity or complexity adjustment factor in there, but really simple stuff doesn't make any sense because it's too simple. The really complex stuff doesn't make sense because it's too complex.
Yeah.
The lawyers aren't going to have what they need to do it right. So then, I mean, it's almost the problem with insurance. If the best goes away, all you're left with is the wrong stuff for the price that's set. So I think that model, it's an interesting idea. It would need, I think, a lot of development. I don't know enough about it to know, what's being presented and what the thoughts are around it.
Yeah.
I know it's a problem in the TPA and the independent adjuster space where it's like, you know, $135 to work this claim, go out, take your pictures, give us a report. I don't think that's necessarily led to the best quality and responsiveness because everyone's effectively like you're incented to just take on as much as more than humanly possible because that's the only way you're going to survive.
Yeah.
And so you get unresponsiveness, you get half-assed kind of work at times. And, but then there's other stuff where like, well, that was way overpayment for what it was. And they did a lovely job of it.
Yeah.
But like that should have been $40 and 135. So I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I'd love to see more on it. I think it's the kind of thing where like pilot it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it hasn't caught on yet. Everybody's talked about it, as a way to create some certainty.
Change. I mean, I think there are cases where it would be really helpful, or maybe with some firms and some carriers, but I think there's also some downside to it. And the question is like, that doesn't mean it's a no. It's just, you got to figure out how to mitigate those opposing forces.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, we'll see where it goes. People keep talking about it. Okay, last question. I'm going to get you out of here.
Okay.
And I cut and paste this right from a LinkedIn post this morning.
Okay.
From a plaintiff attorney. Are you ready? Here we go. Quote, "The job of insurance companies is to manage risk. When they say lawsuits are driving up premiums, they're admitting they did a bad job of understanding their risks. What other industry gets a bailout when they fail at their jobs. Investment banks
Bailout.
in the 2008 financial crisis, a hedge fund, long-term capital management, all got bailed out in the 90s when their trades threatened to destabilize the banking system.
Yeah.
It's time to let market forces work and let companies who are bad at their jobs fail. What is your
So,
response to that?
well, insurance companies have not gotten bailed out. AIG did, but it wasn't the insurance part of the business. It was the investment side that destroyed everything. Uh, so technically, did AIG get bailed out? Yes. Technically, was it the insurance business? And no, if they had split the company apart, then the insurance side could have been viable. Um, the Hartford's the same thing. They got TARP funds by buying a bank, and it was their investment side that was the problem, not their insurance side. So at its core, no insurer in that sense has gotten bailed out. There are receiverships and insolvencies, but the bailout actually comes from your peers, not from the government. That's what the guarantee funds are for. So this is a typical misrepresentation of facts. So that's a problem. Insurance companies' jobs is not to manage risk. That is not listed anywhere as the point of insurance. That's not what the regulations are. Insurance company's job is to assume risk, to buy risk,
Yeah.
and to transfer it. That's what we do. So that doesn't mean there isn't like loss engineering that goes on, and we don't try to help people make risks smaller, but a risk management consultancy, that's their job. So
Yeah.
I don't know what this person's talking about, but I know that everyone who read it was probably like, yeah, yeah, yeah,
And that's
100%.
and
Yeah,
that's the issue, and you see that with politics, and you see that with
yeah,
the reputation with the insurance companies. A final point on this, and then I'll get you out of here. Is you'll see like on LinkedIn especially, and now it's going to TikTok, it's going to X.
yeah,
Is a plaintiff firm may post something, hey, we got this big verdict, right?
yeah,
And they like to advertise that. Hey, it is what it is. That's fine. But here's what I'm reading so much, which I want to get your thoughts on, is they make it a point to say, they'll say like, this was a no offer case by the insurance company. Like that's how bad these, like they offered us nothing, or they offered us something terribly insulting. So
yeah,
that forced us to go get this big verdict. If they would have been smarter, they would have given us something respectable up front. And that's kind of like the theme I'm seeing from the Morgan and Morgans and others that tend to advertise this stuff. I don't know how often that happens, but some of the stuff that you read, like if you read the case synopsis, then you see
yeah.
the verdict, and then you're thinking, like, no offer. Like how does that happen? Do you think that happens a lot, or are they full of it? But I don't. They make a point of advertising that as well.
Well,
What your thoughts on that?
it's to me, it's the same thing as these cases that are like, there was an estimate by the adjuster, and then the insurance company cut it by X%. They're leaving out usually the word public adjuster, but it could be an
Yeah,
IA who the carrier hired. I don't know. But I think that's just it. Do you hear? I just said I don't know.
yeah,
That's what's missing here
yeah,
is to make a statement that the carrier cut the estimate by 90%. Who said the estimate was valid?
yeah,
I didn't say that people aren't going through hell. I didn't say the loss isn't severe. I just said I don't know if the estimate was valid. No, and I've watched like all of these local news channels and Dr. Phil
yeah,
sitting down with for people who go, no, this segment was just paid for by a plaintiff's attorney and a public adjuster, and that's what this whole piece is.
yeah,
Um, it's people aren't actually, and it's the same thing in politics and everything. We are sheep that very easily get triggered and latch on to conspiracy theories because
yep,
it gets you fired up and it sells so well, and people just get roped into it. And in the industry, we're not really doing anything to counter that. And to be fair, I think when we've tried to, it's been these like warm, fuzzy commercials, like we care, and we're like, you're not listening and you're not
yeah,
playing the game.
yeah,
Like you're painting a picture that all these people who are fired up, like, you don't care. You're not there for me. It's the opposite. And look what these guys said. So we're not actually addressing the problem as it's coming up. I'm sure a bunch of your listeners will have seen Loss Ratio on LinkedIn as well. Curtis Goldsboro,
yeah,
he talks about this stuff. I had him on my show, and he's like, we need to actually figure out how to do this, how to educate people on the other side. And he's doing his best, on his own, and he's great. Like he takes apart like the Dr. Phil episode and some of the other stuff. But it's so I no offer. It's possible, and that doesn't mean it was the wrong answer. If there's
Yeah.
no coverage, why would there be an offer?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the person didn't suffer. It's like,
Yeah.
we like in E&O companies that we insured got sued all the time and they did nothing wrong. And it wasn't for things that were covered. And they're like, but we didn't do anything wrong. What do you mean there's no coverage? It's like, it has nothing to do with whether you did anything wrong. And that doesn't stop people from being able to sue you, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that's not what insurance is for. Like there is a contract that lists what it's supposed to respond for and how it responds. And that doesn't mean people understand it, but this, attorney sitting there claiming something else is the
Yeah.
facts doesn't suddenly make them true. And I still feel bad for the people. Instead of wasting all this money on that, why don't we work on figuring out like there's still a coverage gap then? There's still an affordability problem. That doesn't mean that their existing policy should have paid in that. That only makes the affordability problem worse.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out how do we actually address that. There's one carrier that set up a not-for-profit that the carrier's called Branch, and they're a reciprocal, and they've set up this like for their profit stream. They're a B Corp. Their profit stream goes in to fund this nonprofit, and individuals can apply for a grant to pay for their premium if they can't afford it. Doesn't even have to be Branch customers. Like they've paid for the coverage of their competitors. And if you have a loss that's not covered or didn't fully cover you, you can apply for a grant there as well.
Wow.
To offset some of that. And it's because one of the two founders, Steve Lekis, they're in one of my books. He's so passionate about the purpose of insurance and being a force for good that he's like, even if it's not from us, we need to find a way to make people whole when things go wrong. We need to find a way to get more people insured, not fewer, because that risk pool is what creates the safety in the first place.
Yeah.
So they've structured this nonprofit to try to, I mean, obviously like they're small, they're a startup. It's not, it's not a huge effort, but they're doing what they can. Like, why aren't we looking at more solutions like that?
Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much for being on the show, Bryan. So we got plrb.org, and I also see futureofinsurance.com behind you. Is that different?
Yeah, future-of-insurance.com. That's where my books and the podcasts and all that kind of stuff are at. And that's people can engage there pretty easily and find me on LinkedIn too.
Well, I'd listen. I love a good podcast, so I'll be sure to tune into that. And great. Well, listen, have a great trip. I know you have a long flight ahead of you. Thank you so much for being on the show. For our audience members, thank you so much for participating in another edition of the Litigation Psychology Podcast brought to you by Courtroom Sciences. We will see you next time.